There's something quite interesting about the crypto market. There are moves within the market that seem somewhat predictable. At least there's a structure to it. We can explain what's happening. Sometimes capital moves towards Bitcoin, sometimes it goes to Ethereum, then it goes to Solana. In this video, we want to look at relative capital movements within crypto. Does it make sense to be mainly in Bitcoin at a certain period of time? Does it make sense to then move over to Ethereum? At what point does it make sense to rather get into Solana? We're going to look at dominance charts and we're going to compare those dominance charts of Bitcoin, Ethereum and Solana over time. And please don't get a shock when you see this. Yes, it appears complicated at the beginning, but it's really not. What we're seeing here at the top, that's the Solana dominance. Now, what's Solana dominance? It's a measure of how much of all of cryptocurrency's market cap is currently in Solana. So we started out with 0.01% of the entire cryptocurrency market cap being in Solana. Then that went up all the way to the peak of 3.6%. And now we are hovering somewhere around that area between 2 and 3.6%. Those vertical lines here, they indicate turnaround points, because then we can see what happened with Ethereum, for example, when Solana expanded, relatively speaking. And so let's just do that exercise directly now. What we see now at the bottom, that's the Ethereum dominance. It appears as if in the year 2020 and 2021, both Solana and Ethereum grew market share within crypto. Then starting with the year 2022, Solana had a very rough time. Its relevance fell, relatively speaking, by 80%. So had you held Solana instead of any other asset within crypto in the year 2021, you got completely crushed. What happened with Ethereum during the same time period? It also slightly lost some relevance. It wasn't as bad as Solana. It went down by 13% in dominance, but Ethereum investors also did not smile. Now, what happened with Bitcoin at the same time? When Solana and Ethereum expanded, the Bitcoin dominance tended to drop. So being invested in Bitcoin over that time period was not a good idea. When then Solana crashed and Ethereum held up relatively well, Bitcoin went sideways, relatively speaking. So 2021 was a uniquely bad year for Solana. Now, as a comparison, let's have a look at the Bitcoin price. Again, let's just look at the first three phases of this chart. In the very first phase, where we didn't see a lot of changes of Solana dominance or Ethereum dominance or Bitcoin dominance, Bitcoin itself in the price went up massively. So we actually saw a lot of gains across all the cryptocurrencies. It was simply just that none of the cryptocurrencies outperformed that much, relatively speaking. So Bitcoin went from 7K all the way to 31K, an increase of 350%, while the dominance values did not change that much. But then came the year 2021, and Bitcoin still had a bit of growth left. It tended to go sideways, but Bitcoin dominance got completely crushed again, because Ethereum and Solana rallied a lot. Then came the 2022 bear market, where Bitcoin lost its 70%, the Bitcoin dominance, and the Ethereum dominance didn't move that much, but Solana, again, relatively speaking, had its massive correction of 80%. So really, nobody was laughing at the time, but the Solana investors got completely crushed. Bitcoin already in its price went down a lot, 70%, but Solana, relative to the rest of the market, went down an additional 80%. So Solana investors lost pretty much everything. But what happened then when we recovered? Solana returned back to its old heights. So all of the relative losses that were made in 2022, they got regained in the following year. What about Ethereum? Because Ethereum also slightly lost during that year. ETH was not able to slightly gain. In fact, it continued to lose. Bitcoin dominance, on the other hand, did go up. Now, isn't that fascinating? During a bear market, it does make sense that the riskiest of the assets, Solana, might crash more because the active speculation might die down. When then the market recovered, we also saw Solana regaining everything. So it appears as if Solana was simply just a levered Bitcoin, right? When Bitcoin crashed, Solana crashed more. When Bitcoin went up, Solana went up more. Now with Ethereum, we also saw how it underperformed slightly during the bear market. So it was a slightly levered Bitcoin, but when the market recovered, it did not recover as well. The narrative at the time was that Solana might now take over a lot of market share of Ethereum. The Ethereum gas fees are comparatively high. They have come down since then, but people really started to lose hope. Now, what about our recent rally? So say in the last 12 to 14 months. Bitcoin appreciated by roughly 50%. Bitcoin dominance also went up. Solana's dominance tends to slightly go down, and Ethereum got absolutely crushed. Even with this recent rally, ETH underperformed by 45% relative to the rest of crypto. Now here's the first thing that we can take away from this chart. The concept of beta in traditional finance seems to not necessarily always apply in crypto. Now beta means how much does an asset move relative to the entire market. So how risky is an asset? So beta means when the overall market goes up, say by 1%, that the risky asset that has a beta of 2 goes up by 2%. When the overall market goes down by 1%, and the risky asset with beta 2 should go down by 2%. So that's beta. Now we can measure beta mathematically, so we can just look at the volatilities. How volatile is Bitcoin relative to Ethereum and to Solana? And when we do that, we of course know that Solana is more volatile than Ethereum or Bitcoin. But what we have seen with those dominance charts is that just because something is more volatile, so Ethereum relative to Bitcoin, it doesn't mean that it has to outperform when the entire asset class is going up. So Bitcoin tended to outperform Ethereum while the market went from 16K to more than 100K. I think there are trading ranges. And sometimes people are very hyped about Solana because of its adoption with meme coin trading. Sometimes people are very hyped up about Ethereum because of its adoption in the real world asset space. Sometimes people like Bitcoin more because of the accumulation by Wall Street through the ETF, because it's the safest of the cryptocurrencies, because it can be held for the long term. But sometimes Bitcoin can also be relatively too expensive, right? When it's got a dominance of 70%, that's maybe not justified. And that then comes in line with the Bitcoin price having risen already quite a bit, right? The Bitcoin price before this chart started was at 3.5K. That was the bottom of the bear market, and then went all the way up to above 30K. So an almost 10x. And then the Bitcoin dominance was just too high and people are looking for the next Bitcoin. If Bitcoin already does a 10x from its bear market bottom, it's unlikely going to do another 10x very quickly afterwards. And so that's then how the risk rolls over, right? People have made gains in Bitcoin. They want to now make more gains in other asset classes where there's still enough upside. And that's then when Ethereum gets more performant. And then when Ethereum is up, that's then when Solana gets more performant, right? We can see this quite nicely in this chart. First, Bitcoin tends to struggle to gain more dominance while Ethereum becomes more and more relevant in the market. Then once Ethereum has seen its balance, Solana expands more and more. And so just based on those charts, where are we now? Bitcoin's dominance is not yet at 70%, so it probably has more way to go. Solana's dominance is quite high. It had been way lower in the past, and Ethereum's dominance tends to be very close to its all-time low. So that seems to be cheaper. And so what concludes from this is to probably be cautious with Solana, be somewhat optimistic with Ethereum, and potentially still ride somewhat the wave in Bitcoin. Once, of course, Bitcoin goes up too much, once it's at 70% dominance, it might make sense to take at least some chips off the table. The US dollar price might still go up, but will it still outperform the rest of crypto? That's not that clear. I believe that crypto prices in US dollars are likely going to continue to go up. I talked about this several times on this channel. There are still a lot of stable coins on the sidelines that have not yet been deployed. And once they do get deployed, Bitcoin will hit around 130K. And it will then be interesting if Bitcoin dominance climbs to new all-time highs. If that's the case, maybe we see a stronger move towards Ethereum and more profit taking in Solana. And then once Ethereum is high enough, we might go further up the risk curve and see more Solana outperformance again. But before we see Solana outperforming, we first have to see it come down, relatively speaking. At least that's how I interpret the charts. Now, after so many years in crypto, I think there's only two strategies to make money in this market. It's either trying to find altcoins very early, potentially using wallet tracking, buying things before the masses do. And while this is a strategy that can work, it's also comparatively risky. Things like Virtual Protocol or SPX 6900 went up massively this year. But if instead you bought Optimism or IMX or Polygon, you wouldn't have had such a nice time. Now with small bets, a few $100s here and there, the strategy does make sense. But for the vast majority of the portfolio, we have to take less risk. Now, the common narrative is that this less risky bet is simply Bitcoin. And while it's true that there's less risk in Bitcoin than in many altcoins, the price can still go down by 77%. So what can we do? I think the answer lies in taking advantage of crypto's market structure. Most altcoins underperform Bitcoin most of the time. So for example, have a look at this again, right? This is the performance of the top 100 cryptocurrencies in the last year. Again, SPX 6900 outperformed everything else. And here at the bottom, we see Bitcoin. So in the last year, Bitcoin appreciated by almost 72%. Now, how many altcoins outperformed Bitcoin? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Out of 100 altcoins, 17 outperformed Bitcoin and all of the others underperformed. And so with a larger part of the portfolio, we can take advantage of this market structure. So instead of buying Bitcoin, we can buy this here. Now this is the exact same time frame that we see in those charts. And what we see here is again a Bitcoin chart, but it's slightly different. It's not Bitcoin relative to the US dollar, it's Bitcoin relative to Balancer. So what we are seeing here is Bitcoin's relative performance to one of the altcoins, an altcoin that tended to underperform over the long term. Now, why do we see that constant outperformance of Bitcoin over the alts? So it's not just that most altcoins underperform, it's also that the underperformance tends to be rather constant. The reason for this is tokenomics. It's an expanding token supply. Because that's how the venture capitalists and the members of the teams of all those projects make their money. They've got a vesting schedule. They get a token allocation, but they can't sell directly. They have to sell over time, and that depresses the price relative to Bitcoin. Yes, on bullish days, everything is going up. But when we zoom out a little bit, most altcoins are not doing as well as Bitcoin. Now, this is not common knowledge, but we can actually set up a position in a portfolio in a way that we make money when the relative performance of an asset versus another one is going up. So we don't have to bet on the crypto macro. We don't have to bet on Bitcoin going up or down. We can just make money when something outperforms or underperforms. Now, I've made several tutorials on that topic, how to profit from falling prices or gaining from relative valuations, or over here, how to win in bear markets by shorting altcoins. Now, it's not important what the macro is doing if we focus on the relative valuation. Again, the nice thing about the strategy is that it works in any market condition. At the bottom is again Bitcoin. Bitcoin has its massive crashes, and the largest retracement that we saw in this chart was maybe 50%, while the gain was much, much larger. So this is an 8,000% gain in relative valuation, while Bitcoin itself only made 100%. And so I'm of course sharing my own trades as well. Check this out. This is where I opened a short position, a relative short position on the Trump token. That was on April 30th. What we see here is Trump relative to Solana. Some community members entered the short as well. And then I closed the position a few days later for a gain of 142%. Now I actually shorted Trump twice, so this was an earlier trade. And again, here are a few other trades that our community members are making. So if we set this up right, if we've got risk management and hedging properly in place, there is real risk-adjusted alpha in positions like this. And so of course I shorted the Trump token again because of the tokenomics. Over time, the Trump supply increases. And it's really important to understand this concept. I believe that risk adjusted, if you want to make large bets, not just a small bet on the altcoins that might do 100x, if you want to bet a lot of money of our portfolio, then we have to bet on something that risk adjusted performs relatively consistently. So this is Trump in US dollars. And if you just bet on Trump going down, then when the market itself is appreciating, you've got a problem, right? Over this time frame, Trump did not go down. However, Solana relative to Trump went up. So that's the exact same time frame. That's a gain of 35%. So it's all about looking at what tends to do worse relative to something else over time. And how to set up those positions is explained in the videos over here. And so feel free to check it out. It's currently $125 per month. It used to be 165 at the peak of the bull run. Now attention is still relatively low, and so you can lock in the lower rate. I will not increase the rate for anybody that's already subscribed. Only the people that sign up when everything is hyped, they will get the higher price. But if you sign up now, you lock in that price. If it's your first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish here regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well. It helps the channel grow. Feel free to also check out Premium. Again, the link should be somewhere over here. You can just click on the link here. It should bring you to the website. And so yeah, see you next time on YouTube or see you in Premium. Cheers.